the difficult conversations that teachers and like people that are, in the business of teaching music need to have is like, how are we best serving our students, right? How are we making our students successful? And anytime a conversation goes back to, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is the way I learned it, so everybody should do it this way, like, I'm out.
Warning. This episode contains adult language and adult humor.
Since when have trumpet players ever been considered adults?
If you are easily offended by these types of conversations, consider switching to the oboe. Welcome to the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. My guest for this episode is Matt White. Matt walks the road less traveled. His creative approach to harmony and his mastery of the entire range of the trumpet makes Matt a consummate improviser. His arranging and compositional skills have earned him numerous accolades, including being named a Guggenheim Fellow in music composition. And his willingness to question the status quo of trumpet pedagogy makes him an educational maverick. In other words, he's my kind of hang. So, pour yourself a big glass, pull up a chair, and let the hang begin. All right. Thank you for joining us in this episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I am joined by Dr., not just Mr., Dr. Matt White. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Matt. So it's really cool to finally meet you. We have lots of mutual friends, as is wont. The trumpet world is certainly a small community, so we all tend to travel in the same circles. So. Yeah, I've heard your stuff. I've definitely been following you on social media, and you're just doing some super hip stuff, and I definitely want to dive into some of that. But I found out something about you that I didn't realize that. Now that it's like, oh, duh, that you helped my buddy Augie Hass out with his book. You were the editor of that book, so that. How did you manage to do that and keep a straight face? That's what I want to know.
I mean, yeah. So Augie and I were graduate assistants together at the University of Miami, and we sat next to each other in the concert jazz band for, I think, like 3 years. So just became like really, really close friends. And then my wife, Georgia, she actually edited his like master's thesis and his doctoral paper. So like he could kind of get it across the finish line. So yeah, he's like a really great friend. And he had this idea. He's like, hey man, I got this book I want to do. Would you be willing to help me? And so I did some of the editing on it and then gave him some feedback, and we talked about the background tracks. And then even when have you heard of his like bottle opener mouthpiece?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So when he was designing that, he actually came to visit me for a couple of days, and we wrote a jingle for it. I don't know if you've seen the video, but we literally did that all in one day. And we've been friends for such a long time that even like when he comes to town to visit, my wife was just like, you know what? I'm taking the kids and I'm going to my parents' house. You guys just hang out for a couple of days. So usually like mayhem ensues. Yeah. But Augie's a great friend, and yeah, he's a wonderful musician and trumpet player. And he's one of my favorite people. Yeah.
Augie's a great dude. I met him a few years ago at ITG when I was in Columbus, Ohio. I was there kind of hanging out. I for years had done some rep work with Warburton, which is how I know about the the mouthpiece. But Augie and I just kind of hung out and got to chatting and stuff, and just kind of stayed in touch, and actually over COVID we've talked a lot more, and I actually, for my wife's birthday, my wife loves his the stuff that he's been doing recently, the CDs that he's done.
Where he's singing, right?
Yeah, where he's singing. Yeah. And we actually, that was my surprise birthday present for her. Was I got Augie to serenade us for about 2 or 3 tracks, and
that's awesome.
Zoomed in, and yeah, it was so much fun. He's such a cool guy.
Yeah, and he's also like he's a great example to people as somebody who's just like always hustling and always working on something. Because like every time I talk to him, he's like, "Oh, well, I'm working on this," or "I got this cooking show that I'm working on." So he's always up to something. Yeah.
And and that book. I mean, that is part of my daily regimen. With I'm not always, and I have to admit it. All you trumpet players out there, trust me. I am one of those guys that stays fairly busy. Trumpet is not my full-time gig, but I'm still playing regularly. But there are days that I just don't have a chance to practice at home. And living in a townhome, I can't come in at 10 o'clock at night and start practicing. So I do Augie stuff though every day religiously, and a lot of times it's just buzzing on the mouthpiece on my drives, but that's a really cool track, and certainly love the fact that you guys are so close. So that's definitely, so shout out to Augie.
Yeah.
Now we're not going to talk about you anymore, Augie. So this is not your episode. So but yeah, so going on to your stuff, man, definitely I've been digging the stuff that you've been doing, and mostly because I'm sort of a musical techno geek as well. Nowhere near the level that you're working at, but the tracks that you've been producing, using Ableton and the other production stuff, I'm just really digging it, man. It's just super, super hip stuff. So when did you first get started in that world, of going from like the traditional acoustic jazz setting into doing some of this really cool kind of electronic stuff that you've been working on?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it's actually back to when I was in school too. Is that I was like playing a lot of recording sessions and was realizing that I hated the way my trumpet sounded on all these recording sessions, and so like my solution was I need to learn something about this. So I started taking like tech classes as part of grad school, and then like bought Pro Tools and got like an interface, and literally it was just like asking people, hey man, you got a session you're working on? Like, let me check it out. And I was just learning by trial and error. If I got like to a studio or something where I was a trumpet player, I would ask to hang out and be in the control room. And so that was kind of my introduction to tech. And then it became like, once I figured out the programming aspect of it, and this was something that could, augment the music I was writing. Cause yeah, I compose a lot of music. So electronic stuff, I'm doing this project right now with like my small group where I'm actually doing, I'll call them derangements, not arrangements, of early Dolly Parton music. And so I've been getting really in. So it's trumpet, organ, drums, guitar, and a vocalist. And with the vocal, we're doing like a lot of pop production stuff. So like, taking influences from like Billie Eilish, and I'm doing a lot of synth programming and that kind of stuff. So, for me, it's just like, it's another way to be creative. And definitely with the pandemic, the idea that, using these tools when I can't maybe collaborate with people in person, to make interesting musical stuff and just kind of keep me creative and doing different things and just composing constantly, even if I don't have access to musicians to play the music.
Yeah. Well, it seems like there are, like in all things, there are these camps of people. So you have the jazz purist, and you can't use electronics. That's not jazz. And then you have people that are definitely going to embrace the technology a lot more. And some people you actually even eschew, the traditional stuff. It's like, oh, we just got to be all modern. But it's finding that delicate balance of how you can maximize technology and use it as basically, it's like a new sound palette, a new way of being able to take your ideas and put them out there. So when you're doing this in terms of your creative, how you get your creative juices flowing, do you tend to gravitate towards trumpet as the primary voice that you want to use, or do you use that electronic palette to kind of give you the foundation to build and put the trumpet on top? Or is there kind of a standard that you go to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like it's something different every day. I mean, part of my daily routine, besides being a trumpet player, is just trying to write something, and thinking of like, okay, well, I am a trumpet player, and in what way can I integrate trumpet into that? And sometimes it's like, oh, cool, like I'll make these little loops and I can solo over them, or maybe this melody would sound really great over it. But sometimes I write stuff and it's like, well, maybe the trumpet isn't the best thing for this particular piece. I did this like record a couple of years ago just called The Trumpet, And it literally just started is that my son, who was like less than a year old, and I wanted to be writing music and I wanted to do a recording project, but I didn't have like the time or the resources to get a band together and go to the studio. And so I had this idea that I was going to make a 5-track record where the only sounds were things that came from the trumpet. So there's arrangements where like literally there's 40 trumpet tracks playing. And in some cases, like I would run them through like a signal generator and use like valve clicks to create like snare sounds. And like, I got like super deep in it, but I think all of it is just thinking, more broadly musically, what can the trumpet do, and what can I write in such a way that might push the limits of what I'm working on, or, something that might make me feel like kind of uncomfortable musically, but I, take it as a challenge through creating music.
Yeah. Well, and that seems to be a theme, like of the stuff that I've been following of yours, where it's, you want to push your boundaries. That's what comes across to me is like, okay, what can I do that's just a little bit further than what I've done in the past? And that's really kind of cool, particularly in terms of, sonically, obviously. There was something you did recently where you had some just crazy voicings going on. It's kind of a pop tune, and it just, some really unique voicings going on. And it's like, yeah, okay, wow, this is really hip. I can see where this is going. Do you ever have those moments where you like do something, you go, okay, that was just a little too far?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. And to me, that's what makes music fun is the idea of like, I'm going to paint myself in a corner and see how I can get out. Right. Like either as an improviser or, there's been so many times where like I've literally come up with a voicing or stacked horns on something, even if it's for a client. And I'm like, I wonder if I can sneak this in. Right. It's like, okay, what if I take those two inner voices and I make them a half step apart here? Like, are they going to notice, will it just feel, so it's always kind of that thing where I always feel like I'm kind of turning the screw a little bit and I'm seeing how much I can get away with. But for me, that's fun, and it keeps me like really engaged with it, is trying to find new ways that I can do things and things that are non-traditional. And like one of the projects I'm working on now is I got this grant through like the Arts Ministry of the Czech Republic. And they got this grant that they wanted to take these hip hop artists and have a live big band with them. Okay. And so I usually don't write big band because like kind of what you're talking about is like, I feel like there's so many of my friends that are so fantastic at, writing, four-part bassy voicings or like writing in the style of Thad and all that. But if it's weird, I'm into it. Right. And so I was like, okay. And they're like, okay, well, we want a big band, but we don't want you to write it like it's a big band. I'm like, okay, I'm in. Right. And so what they do, and it's been really fascinating because the people I'm working with, they're not musicians. So like, I can't just send them a score. So what I actually do is they send me the tracks. I track everything. And so I had to learn marching baritone so I could get some of like the low voicings on like the brass and stuff. And so I'll send them the whole track and then I send them the stems for it. And then they cut it up. They send it back to me. I adjust it because I might say something like, okay, well, the trombone one is not going to be able to play like 64 measures without a break. That's crazy. And then I send them the charts then, and then they record it. So it's just always finding these ways to do like strange things or things that are slightly different that, kind of keep me engaged creatively.
Yeah. That sounds like a really, really cool project.
Yeah. It's been really fun. Although it's funny because like the tracks are killing, man. And it's like stuff that feels really great, but I have no idea what the people are saying because obviously they're like rapping in Czech. So I'm like, oh, I hope none of this is like bad stuff or things I don't want to necessarily be. But yeah, it's been an awesome project and we're down. I think we've done like 4 charts and I think it was contracted to do 6 and eventually it'll be debuted at a live festival in Prague, which is pretty exciting.
Cool. Are you going to be able to go to that event?
I hope so. Yeah, I'd love to be able to fly out there and check it out and, maybe conduct or something. It'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I really enjoy kind of that melding of styles. And I think, that's what jazz is anyway, know? I love kind of the fusion of hip hop and jazz and like, the stuff that Roy Hargrove was doing, like with RH Factor and Russell Gunn and some cats like that just when the first time I heard that I was like, yeah, this is definitely badass, and I can
Yeah.
definitely get behind this. And so I could just imagine, hearing this hip hop, with a full big band. That just has got to be bizarre. And my wife is European. She's from Romania.
Mm.
And so a lot of times she's got her Romanian music on, and it really surprises me when I start to hear. I'm used to hearing hip hop here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Big fan of Wu-Tang Clan, NWA. I'm a little older, so some of the old school rap, and even up into to modern days. But it's so funny how that as a creative expression, as an art form. And certainly there'll be people that will argue with me that the rap is not music, that hip hop is not music. But I'm like, dude, it is definitely, it is creative as it can be. But to have that and listen to it, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing Romanian rap, and I'm hearing Turkish, and it's like all these different ethnicities, and hearing the use of hip hop and hip hop rhythms and hip hop stylings and things like that. It's really super cool, and how they fuse their own ethnic music with it. It's just so creative and so cool. So I'm really looking forward to checking that project out. You have to keep me posted on it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, if people think about, like, as jazz being, one of our greatest exports as Americans, right? I mean, you could say that about hip hop too, in terms of like the influence that it's had on culture around the world. And, I mean, I'll have my students, when I'm teaching, I'll have them transcribe like Kendrick Lamar phrasing, because that is rhythmically incredibly sophisticated, right? And
Yeah.
there's something you can learn from that. And even as somebody who's really into music production and music technology, I mean, even if you're listening to a song that might be two chords, there's so much you can take from that, like by the production of it, or how the track is put together, that can make your music better. And so I think for me is just this idea, like, you can learn from anything that's happening around you, as long as you're open to it.
Yeah. And especially people that are performing and creating at a high level, the people that are pushing the boundaries, obviously. And you're talking about Kendrick Lamar. Yeah, certainly you listen to that phrasing. I think it was Chris Jodis, a few episodes ago. I interviewed Chris, and Chris and I were talking about inspirations for improvisation. And certainly it's great to listen to, let's go all the way back to pops. Certainly you want to go back, and you want to study the tradition. You want to study the people who set the framework for what we do. But at some point you have to deviate off of that path if you want to keep jazz true to its essence, which is to embrace the originality, to embrace the expressiveness, to embrace the ability to take and to synthesize and to create this unique improvisational music. And you have to be able to go beyond what has come before. And I think sometimes that we lose track of, because we get to this point where it's like, okay, I'm comfortable, then this is it, and I don't want to go any further. So like you're saying, like, some of the rhythmic phrasing that some of these hip hop artists come up with, it's like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting if you try to play a line with that kind of phrasing, it really changes your approach to the instrument. So I'm really down with that, man. So, like, who are some of the outside the box inspirations that you have musically?
Oh, sure. I mean, definitely Kendrick. Bjork is somebody that, like, I'm really into.
Mm-hmm.
Classical composers, I really love Bartok. I mean, I love Bach, which, I mean, that's not like saying something that's like super hip or modern or new or anything. But yeah, I mean, Sylvan Esso, which is like an electronic music duo. I really love their stuff. I've been checking out this group, Tank and the Bangas from New Orleans. I don't know if you're hip to them, but like my kids love them. And like, there's just so much groove and infectious groove happening. One of the things like I'm super involved in living here in South Carolina is kind of the preservation of gullah culture. And so there's a group called Ranky Tanky, which is a bunch of my friends in Charleston that they've done like contemporization of like old gullah music, which is pretty incredible. So yeah, I mean, I think just listening everywhere and thinking like, yeah, what can I hear from this or what's interesting? And, you know, kind of saying, going on what you said earlier, is that the reason I got into jazz is because I wanted to express myself. Right. And I think that's why most of us get into it, because we're thinking, okay, improvisation's like, wow, I get to say something that's uniquely me in this moment. Right. And so we always have to make sure that that's kind of the step of what we're teaching, is like, yes, respect the tradition, learn from the masters, right? But also like, what are these little bits and pieces I take from things that interest me, and how do I integrate them to make me myself?
Yeah.
And I think as long as we're always kind of keeping that in mind as like the goal point, I think that's how we kind of stay engaged with everything and improve.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a big thing, like in my previous career as a martial arts instructor, that you know, because that's something that has that very, very deep tradition. And I really got frustrated with people, because, like, you know, people would say, okay, well, this is traditional and this is, you know, whatever. But it's like, you know, we get so caught up with, we're married to the dogma as opposed to the true essence of what something represents. So, you know, martial arts is all about improvisation and creativity, much like jazz. You know, it's adaptability. Things had to change on a generational basis based upon, you know, differences in technique, different warfare strategies. You know, everything has to be able to evolve. But, you know, at some point, people just want to freeze and say, okay, well, this is it. This is, you know, it can't change from that. And to me, whatever art form it is, when you reach that point where you say it can't change, then it's dying.
Yep.
You know,
Totally
if it's not evolving, it's not growing. And if it's a dying art form, well, you know, I don't want to waste my time with that. You know, I want to be involved in something that's going to continue to grow and to change and you know, become something new. So when, as a teacher, you know, how do you help to instill that in your students? You know, what are the hot buttons that you want to push to shift people? Because, you know, I think our educational system, whether it be just general education or you know, the arts, so much of it is stuck into this dogmatic approach. I mean, how do you help people to break that mold and to start thinking a little more creatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying like resonates with me, because for me, the most important thing is problem solving, right? And if anything, like that's what I want my students to take away from working with me, is not like, oh, I learned to do this specific thing or this specific thing. Is like, I had a problem musically or even in life, right? I had an issue, and this is how I came up with a strategy to get better. You know, so if you sound bad on the bridge to a tune, like how do you practice it to get better? If your time's bad, how do you get better, right? If your ears are bad, how do you improve that? And so always thinking about that. And that's, I think, where the creativity and practice comes back to. But yeah, I mean, I've been in academia for a while now. And I think one of the things that's, you know, these ideas of like adhering to dogma, they don't serve the students, and they don't really serve us as teachers. And so for me, having the ability to look at a problem and not just say that this is the one way to fix it because this is the way I was taught or this is what my teacher told me. It's just see a student struggling with something and go like, well, what if I explained it this way? What if we tried this? Right. And for me, you know, bringing it back to trumpet is, you know, my early teachers were mostly like Adams from like the Bill Adams school. Right.
Right.
But even then, like seeking out other things just to be like, could this help my students? Right. Like, let me learn a little bit about Caruso and Laurie Frank, because maybe that'll help my students. I don't buzz on the mouthpiece, but like maybe I should read the James Thompson book so that maybe there's something there that'll help my students. And so I think any kind of dogma you get into is pretty dangerous and pretty limiting. And I think the other big thing for me with education is helping us to get out of this idea that, you know, education obviously in academia moves really slow. It's slow to make any changes. And as somebody who's worked in it, it's really hard to get people on board with new ideas. But, getting away from this idea that students can only be, one of three things. They can either perform, teach, or compose. And we know, as people that have worked in the industry now, like that's not the case, right? Most people have 4 or 5 things that they're doing and they're piecing together a living. But if we don't tell students that, they go into the world and they think like, well, I have to get a job with an orchestra or I'm dead in the water. And so for me is like, first of all, helping students understand that that's not the case. And then going back to some of the stuff we're talking about earlier is being really open, and to saying like, what, yeah, I love playing the trumpet and I love playing maybe traditional jazz, but maybe I like hip hop and maybe I can, be a producer. Maybe I can make tracks for people. Maybe I can be an arranger. Maybe I can have a small studio of like 10 to 15 students, and piecing those things together. That's what gives you like a fulfilling career in music. It's not just doing one thing.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really important concept. And it's been kind of a recurring theme, both in the interviews that I've been doing recently and just in general in my life and the things that are going around me. It's the, what is it that you're really trying to accomplish? And what is it that's really important to you? That question. Is it being a trumpet player? Okay, well, if that's the most important thing to you, then don't limit yourself to saying that you can only play, classical gigs. You can only play big band gigs, whatever. Playing the trumpet, if you love playing the trumpet and you want that to be your career, then play everything you can, anytime, anywhere. Just do that and be happy with it. Don't limit your options. If it's to be a musician, well, then that's a different thing, because being a musician can be, like you said, you can be playing your horn, or it can be producing tracks. It can be, engineering, it can be a lot of different things that are part of that process. If it's about creativity, well, then creativity can express itself in so many different ways. You can write a book, you can, so it's like really getting down to answering that fundamental question: what is the most important thing to you? That foundation thing that really gives you juice, and then look for as many ways of expressing that concept as humanly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I tell my students this all the time, but if your goal when you go to college to study music, let's say, if your goal is to do one single thing, you're really missing the point, right? Your job when you go to school should be to become a great musician and have all these different experiences. If your outlook is to be, the greatest lead trumpet player on the planet, will like save your money and go take lessons with Roger Ingram or Wayne, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be a better use of that time. So all those things that students complain about, and I complained about them too, going to theory class, learning class piano, going to ear training, music history, those are all ways to build your musicianship, right? And by building that musicianship, you're looking at it and you're going like, wow, I can be comfortable in a bunch of these situations and I can figure out a way to be successful.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I had a great talk with James Morrison, previous episode, and he had a really interesting take on theory and in the way he teaches it. He said, most people want to teach theory first and then apply it. He says, he wants to teach application first and then help you to understand the theory as to how and why it works to give you a better sense of things. And I think, in terms of the way our education system, particularly music, is set up, that sometimes we put the application side of things secondary. And, it's like, okay, well, the first thing is we need to make music. Let's make some music. Let's play the horn. Let's sing. Let's do this. Okay, now let's get under the hood and come to a deeper understanding of it. But the theory should be what gives us context for what we do.
Right. And that's what theory is, right? The whole reason is so that when we play music or we hear music, we can have a deeper understanding of it. And we get so disconnected from that. And, the difficult conversations that teachers and like people that are, in the business of teaching music need to have is like, how are we best serving our students, right? How are we making our students successful? And anytime a conversation goes back to, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is the way I learned it, so everybody should do it this way, like I'm out.
Yeah.
Like That's it. Cause we're getting away from the point. And, so if writing 4-part Lutheran chorales is the best way to learn voice leading, okay. But like, let's have that conversation, because most of our students, when they come in, have no idea what a 4-part Lutheran chorale is. Right. So maybe there's a different way that we could teach them voice leading. How harmony moves horizontally. So yeah, I mean, I'm really into having those conversations. And for me, a lot of times it's just like when people tell me like, this is what we're going to do. And this is why I have tenure, which is good because I can say this now. And I go, why? Why are we doing this? Why? Yeah. And again, if we say we're doing this because we think this is the best thing to teach this to our students, cool. That's a great conversation to have.
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit you hit it right on the head with that why, because I think that's always the ultimate question that we have to ask ourselves. Why am I doing this? And when you get to that kind of well, this is the way it's always been. Yeah, like I'm with you on that. It's like, okay, well, that's the kiss of death as far as I'm concerned, because that means that you're not open to new possibilities. You're looking backwards and not looking forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that is, we have to take the responsibilities of people teaching it, is we have to keep educating ourselves. We have to be, we have to be listening to what's going on. We need to be observing what's going on. And because if not, which is what happens in a lot of schools, we're giving our students a picture of what music was like 30 years ago, or, even longer. And if we're not at least somewhat connected to what's going on now, we're not really helping them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've had this conversation with a number of people who are involved in academia and in teaching in other aspects. What is it like, if you had to put your finger on the one thing that you would want to create a change in, like, you're given the power to make this massive shift in the way that music is taught, what would be that one thing, or that one critical skill that you feel would make the hugest difference in the way music was taught?
Yeah, I think, it'd probably be a couple things, but I think the big thing for me is prioritizing rhythm. Because so many of my students, they're taught, and this starts early in music, by the way, this isn't just like in college, but they're taught to prioritize pitch and pitch correctness, right? Mm-hmm. But we know that most of the music that makes us feel good because the way that the rhythm feels and the pulse. And so many students come into school and they either don't internalize a pulse, or if they internalize a pulse, they can't make the next step, which is kind of the mechanical use of it on their instrument. And so like things I've had ideas for is like, what if there was what I call like a rhythm class? And just like you go to like ear training, your first semester, you go to theory 1, you go to a class and there's like a master drummer that's just playing a groove. And you learn to play with that groove. You learn to subdivide it the different ways. You learn to subdivide it in 2s and 4s and 3s and feel those things. And eventually you start taking your instrument and making those rhythmic things happen as well. So I think for me, that would be the big thing, is like prioritizing rhythm. And then also, this is like a hot button topic that people talk about all the time, but like, why is written theory 3 credits and ear training is 1 credit in most theory curriculums, right? Because we know the ear is the most important tool. That's what we use to listen to music. And so why are we prioritizing looking at the music as being a more important skill than actually being able to hear the music? So I think those would be like kind of my 2 big foundational things.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's take this a step further. We're gonna go down rabbit hole. Okay. Hopefully this doesn't screw with your tender. No,
the president's already signed it, so I think I'm good. I think I'm solid.
You're solid. No. Obviously there are these needs in terms of the practical skills of a musician, but I think there's some other things that are missing, and particularly, someone like, you've got experience not only as an educator, but as a performer. But I think there are some serious life skills that are missing in terms of the way that we structure our curriculum. So if, you here again, Matt White gets to create his own ideal, music curriculum at his university. What are some of the other things that you would want to see as requirements, as requisite studies that are kind of overlooked in the educational process that we're kind of left to flounder and learn on our own, sometimes the hard way?
Yeah, I mean, I think and this is like something I'm actually already doing at my new gig. I'm getting ready to take over as the chair of jazz studies at the University of South Carolina. And so we're already looking at like ways that we can improve the curriculum. And so for a big one for me is entrepreneurship, right? Every young musician should look at themselves as a startup business, right? Because what is your product? You're promoting yourself. And so, some of the things that I think that are really important with that is like knowing how to do your taxes, right? How many of us have had to do our own taxes and been like, what? Like, what's a mileage log? Wait, I can write that stuff off, right? So I think that finances, we talk a lot about like what I call like career maintenance, which is not something I have to do as much now because, mostly I'm a teacher. But when I was a freelance musician living in Nashville, I had like a 2-hour block every Thursday morning where all I did was what I called like career maintenance, which was like emails, phone calls, following up with people, reaching out to people. Because, I think what you're saying too is like relationships is like the backbone of what we do, right? So like being available, being cool, being agreeable, having all those skills that you're just assumed to have, those are all things, but we don't teach that in school. So I think like kind of those business elements are things that I think that every student needs to be taught. And I think the other one is interfacing with technology. I'm getting ready to make a class where like literally the whole class is learning how to track remotely and then send people files for projects. Because, it was something that was happening before and I was certainly doing it a lot. Because I live in kind of the middle of nowhere in South Carolina. Like there's no big studios nearby me that can go track. So I'm doing it all in my little office here. But having the ability to, arrange and stack a horn section from home and then be able to send the files correctly to clients. I mean, this is just stuff that like everybody has to be able to do to be able to edit your own tracks. And so those are all the things I think that I would like to see kind of, these being like the assumed skill sets that every musician needs to have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. I know, you obviously could, become a music technology major, so yeah, there's that thing, but I think that for any performing musician, there should be, a level of experience that you have with the technology side of things. I think back to my schooling, and this was, back in the very early 80s. There were no real classes for how to deal with sound issues, and when you get on a gig, unless you're at the top of the heap, which no one starts at the top of the heap, we're all climbing our way up.
Yeah.
You're doing club dates, you're doing small things, and you don't know how to deal with sound reinforcement issues. You don't know how to deal with mic placement. You don't know how to do all these things that, maybe a tech major would know. But, as a player, I think it behooves us to understand, at least on a cursory level, how to set up a mic properly, how to set up a basic monitor mix, how to deal with EQing and things like that.
And how to communicate with the people to get what you want, I think, is a big part of it too.
Right.
Because there's always that contentious relationship between like the performers and the sound person, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it sounds awful and I'm miserable. But it's like, also it would help us if we could say like, hey, could you roll off a little of the highs starting at 2K in my monitor, right? And to make me happy and to make me feel like this is actually what my trumpet sounds like. And that's good information for a sound person. Or, how many times have you gone to like a college or high school jazz band concert and like a soloist starts playing and they're nowhere near the microphone, right? And like the big band director has to like take the microphone and like move it over to the soloist. But like, why don't we practice that? And so like, even with my trumpet students, like I'll just put a dummy mic next to their stand in my office and I'll be like, practice how you would play on a microphone for this. Okay. And if you're moving around, if you're getting into it, that's cool. But understand that now you're making the sound person's job harder because they're having to like ride the gain to because you're not staying on the microphone. So these are all things that we can integrate into our teaching. We just have to kind of think about them. and be open to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's super, super cool stuff. Um, with, with your studio, you know, how many students do you have currently?
Well, right now, the studio that I'm leaving, because I'm getting ready to switch gigs, but right now in my current studio at Coastal, I had 9 trumpet students.
Okay. All right. And, you know, with those students, you know, was there like a specific demographic that you were dealing with? I mean, was it, you know, people that were more interested in performance, more in education? Yeah. I mean, here we go back to those standard categories that
I mean, sometimes we just have to make categories whether we like it or not. Yeah. But so that program, we had what's called a commercial music and jazz major, which was like an undergraduate degree that I kind of built from the ground up. And that was about half of my trumpet students. And then a couple ed majors. And I think I only had like 2, what you would consider like traditional trumpet performance students. But, you know, one of the things that was really important to me was to try to kind of, and I'm always learning. And so there was plenty of failures along the way, and there will continue to be, but, you know, having an idea of like a trumpet curriculum in the studio that actually is reflective of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So, you know, I had a student, for example, do their jury this past semester where they played the first movement of the Hindemith concerto, but they also had to play the horn parts from like Superstition and sing a song,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And everybody has to do some improvisation. And even if those aren't those specialties, because to me, like you were saying earlier, like most of us end up doing club dates or wedding gigs, like these are things that you need to know.
Yeah.
And not only the things you need to know, but like you could learn something about like clean articulation by actually playing Superstition clean. Right.
Yeah.
That's something that you can learn. And so that's kind of the way I've approached in terms of teaching the studio, is kind of making sure everybody's got a very balanced approach. And then if they have things that they need to really specifically hone in on, we'll hone in on those just a little more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, I think that, you know, like we were saying earlier, you know, being able, if you want to be a trumpet player, if you want to play trumpet in many situations as possible, you know, there are certain things that are your standard repertoire, but it's probably not going to be, you know, the Hummel or the Haydn or, you know, any of those classical things, unless you know you're doing, you know, the audition circuit. You know, you're going to be playing, if anything, legit. The thing you're going to play the most might be trumpet voluntary.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And, you know, how about getting good on that? How about, you know, learning those bodacious licks, Earth, Wind, and Fire kind of licks, like, you know, September, you know, that drives everybody nuts, you know. So, okay, you want to practice your articulation, your double tonguing. Okay, how about playing this lick? All right, how about
right? And you could argue that that's just as effective as useful as like learning concert etude, if you're learning how to like multiple tongue or cleanly articulate something, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I love kind of thinking about it coming from that perspective of like, you know, what are the things you're gonna have to do? Like, yeah, if you have to play a wedding ceremony, like these are the tunes you're gonna need to know. Can you play them? You know, learning the piccolo trumpet from that perspective of like, okay, let's learn the wedding rep first.
Yeah.
This is the stuff you're probably gonna have to play.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you know, going back to my martial arts days, a lot of times people would ask me like, "Hey, well, what's a practical application of this?" I'm like, "Well, okay, I can show you all these different concepts, but you know, ideally, especially because I taught a lot of Tai Chi, it's like, you know, okay, well, the most practical application of this is that it's going to keep you from falling down a flight of steps. You know,
yeah.
it's gonna help you to understand how to deal with an aggressive personality, as opposed to, you know, this is how you break somebody's neck with something like this, because practical just means that it's useful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it serves a purpose, and I would rather look at what am I going to use something for most consistently. You know, what's the thing I'm going to have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, not the thing that may happen 1 out of a 1,000 times. You know, and sometimes I think that's what we tend to do, is we focus on the what ifs as opposed to the what is most probable. And and I think as a trumpet player, there are, I would love to see a new standard repertoire be developed. And, like you're saying, things like, Superstition, September, the wedding repertoire, the Star Spangled Banner, for, for goodness sake. I mean, how many times are you going to get a call for doing that? Taps.
Oh, yeah.
Just the stuff that, hey, if you were really good at doing these things, you could actually make a fairly solid living as a working player.
Yeah, and I think also using repertoire as a way to address an issue in your playing so that you feel comfortable in other musical situations, right? As opposed to saying like, we're going to learn the Hummel because there might be a time 15 years from now you get to program it with a band or something, right? And instead of looking at it as like, okay, what is this thing teaching me that I'll be able to apply in other situations? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to make ourselves super comfortable on anything we're asked to do. Right. It's the same thing with ranges. It's like, well, why do we want to have a good upper register or great endurance? It's so when we get called for a gig and we have to use those things, we're not freaking out. We feel like we can do it. And so I think all the teaching should be oriented in that way, is like, what skill sets am I building up so that when I get called to do something and they throw a piece of music in front of me, I'm like, I got this.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's developing that toolbox, to be able to freely communicate the ideas that you have, building that vocabulary, and whether it's the technical vocabulary, having your fingers work, whether it's the ideas, by exposing yourself to different, sounds, different rhythms, different concepts, different harmonies, the range, the ability to have that fluency throughout the horn. So, like you were saying, man, definitely. So you feel like whenever and wherever you are, you're comfortable. And, I think that's got to be the key.
And I think that, improvisation is the same way. And, one of the way I practice improvisation and I try to do with my students is like, let's do this with a lot of limitations, right? Because if we can do the limitations when we play, because ultimately when like I improvise and I'm playing with other human beings, I want to be free. So I just want, if something comes in my mind, I want to be able to try to execute it. Or if I hear like the drummer do something interesting, I want to interact with that. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to students about improvisation, it'll be something like, can you play me a compelling chorus only using quarter notes? Or can you like play a really interesting solo only staying within this octave, right? And so like when we put those limitations on ourselves and we kind of think about and we're developing those really specific skills, the idea should be that like those are the tools that you're developing. And then when you go out and play, you're taking like the bumpers off, right? You're just saying like, okay, anything that happens, we're good to go now because we practiced all these little individual things. And it always kind of astounds me when you can have like a really good instrumentalist or musician that knows how to get better at stuff. But then when you like tell them like, hey, we're going to work on improvisation, they just put on like a play along track and play along, like, just do multiple choruses, just hoping something will stick. Like that's not a strategy to get better at anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. One of my teachers did have that approach, and it's like, okay, yeah, let's just, we're only going to do quarter notes. We're only going to do, these things. And it kind of, to me, it was like, I'm trying to remember exactly how the quote went, but it's Einstein, basically, to paraphrase it, saying that, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes, especially for improvisation, it becomes, how fast can you play? How many notes can you play? And, it which is to me the musical equivalent of verbal diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you to try to explain something to me and take up 30 minutes doing it. If you can tell me in 3 words how to do something and I can do it, then that means you really understand it. Exactly. And therefore I can understand it. So I think sometimes that, with improvisation, people are relying on like the shotgun method, the scatter shot, and hoping that if they throw out enough ideas that something will eventually,
that'll stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's so a lot of times people talk about music as being a language, and one of the ones I like to use when I'm talking about exactly what you're talking about is like it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Short, succinct, and punctuated. But a lot of times when we improvise, we go, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I just woke up, I accidentally kicked the cat, I can't find my socks. So we took like this beautiful idea and we added all this garbage to it when we could have just like said the idea, let it sit for a minute. And you know, that's one of the things that like I think about like the people that are like the utmost of improvisers, and usually the most profound things they play is after space.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you hear Herbie play, right? And he'd be like going for something and like kind of gets into a corner and he stops and like the band fills in. Like the next thing he plays is the baddest thing you've ever heard. Because like he just composed himself and he was like, here we go. And to me, that's like that's like the pinnacle of what we should be trying to achieve is like using those pauses, using punctuation as a way to get our ideas across.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, going back to what we were talking about earlier about, finding inspirations for your playing from sources outside of playing. Reading a greatly written piece, something, even we, go back to the, like obviously, like the studying of Shakespeare and things like that, and then Dickens. But even going back to like, you're talking about like Kendrick Lamar and the way that, a lot of hip hop artists are able to create these really compelling phrases. And, looking at that and thinking about the rhythm of the language, the way that sentences are structured, the way that a narrative is created, and thinking about the way that we phrase our music, basically telling a story. And I think space is probably the most underrated, and we'll get to that later on, one of the most underrated aspects of improvisation. Definitely as a mature improviser will understand that, but man, just you have to give things space. You have to give them room to breathe, and whether it's to create a reset for yourself, or if you go back to a great speech by someone, just the ability to stop and to give that pause and let things sink in before you say your next sentence. I think that's one of the things that we sometimes miss as musicians, the power of that.
Yeah, and I think it's I think there's a couple things at play. I mean, editing, right? So we talk like you're an author, and like we're talking about people that write the language, but editing is such an important part of this process. And that's kind of what we have to do as musicians too, is like sometimes knowing when to stop playing or what not to play is just as important as knowing what to play. Yeah. And to allow that space. And I think the other reason that's important is because, going back to like why people play improvised music is a big thing for me is like, do not treat the rhythm section like an Ebersol. Right. And a lot of people do that. And so, what I want to do is like create a space that where like, maybe I have an idea and I leave some space, and now maybe the piano player played something interesting and like, oh, that's a better idea. Yeah. Let's do something with that. But it wouldn't have happened if I didn't leave the space for somebody to interject something. And I think that the kind of the communication and kind of that communal nature of what we do, I think that's what's beautiful, but you can't do that if you're monologuing the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that communication. And I think, you see that definitely with, you look at any of the classic, the standards, for jazz, some of the ensembles. I mean, look at like, some of Miles's bands, and the interplay between all of the members of the band, and especially because, Miles was definitely one of the masters of space, and it wasn't like everybody was fighting to fill space, but it's when he created space, everything just naturally flowed to fill, and then to dissipate again as he stepped into the spotlight. So But you can't do that if you're not working as this symbiotic unit. You have to be listening. You have to be not just listening, because it's like, people say that most people don't listen. That they don't truly listen when you're having a conversation. Your attention is actually spent formulating your response to what someone is saying. You're thinking about what you want to say instead of really listening and taking what's going on. And I think with kind of some of those great ensembles, they weren't listening; they were actually functioning as a singular unit. It was like a hive mind almost, and everybody was just organically finding that space to express and to support each other. And when that happens, it's magic. But like you said, if you're just thinking about the rhythm section as your play along track, that never happens.
Man, I got a great story about that. So like one of my mentors is this guy, Steve Bailey. He's a bass player, and he's the chair of the bass department at Berkeley. And like through Steve, I ended up getting a great relationship with Victor Wooten and all these other people. But Steve is really tight with Ron Carter. And so he was telling me, he like texted me this one day and I was flipping out. So he went over to Ron's house and Ron like started playing ESP, the Miles record. And Ron started giving Steve a play-by-play of what was happening, and he would be like, oh, he's like, so, Herbie went down a half step here. So that's why I played a D flat there. And he started like giving him the play-by-play of like exactly what they were doing in the moment. I was like, it's like making my brain explode. Like wow. what that must've been like. Yeah. Yeah,
man, that, yeah. Cause I mean, those were, definitely some of the seminal recordings, just the stuff that went on there in terms of the creativity and the, I can't find words to express how impactful the work that those guys did was. It was amazing.
Yeah, and you listen to it today. I mean, it still sounds incredibly fresh. It sounds like the hippest thing you've ever heard. What they're doing on those records, and they're like 50 years old now or more. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
And actually, speaking of Vic, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because I know that you've done some stuff with him recently. He's one of my all-time favorite musicians. Just a phenomenal player, and I love his approach to things. His book, The Music Lesson, actually was a required reading for my coaching staff at my martial arts school, because I felt that not only was it the one of the best books I'd ever read about music, it's just a great book about the process of learning and about life itself. And because hey, it's all the same stuff. But I know that you've done some stuff recently with him and with
so the interview series we did. So we did one with Terry Lynn Carrington.
Yes, that was the one. Terry Lynn Carrington. That's
Lucas Nelson, who's Willie Nelson's son. We did one. Howard Levy, who's like, I don't know if you know Howard's playing. He's like a genius. He's crazy. But yeah, we're like, and that's all been like my relationship with Steve is we just become really good friends. And then I ended up becoming the big band arranger for the Bass Extremes big band, which will like eventually do a record, which is Vic, Steve, both playing bass, and then Greg Bissonette playing drums with a big band. And they were like, they're like, hey, we really want to do this big band. Will you arrange it for us? And I was like, yeah, because that sounds weird, like having two bass players. Let's do it. That sounds fun. And it was crazy because none of their stuff is written down. So I had to transcribe it. And I'm a pretty good transcriber, but like when you have two basses playing, it's so low that like sometimes you're like, oh, what's actually happening there? And like I would text them and be like, hey, are you guys playing a B flat or an A here? And they go, yes. Probably because like they were playing both notes. But yeah. And so, but I agree with Vic. I mean, he's like, he has a way of every time we get together and play, which only occasionally happens, but he just has like a way of kind of like centering you of like what you're actually doing and like what music should be about and like what life should be about and like what should I be prioritizing. And he's such like an incredible human being. And I mean, that comes through in the way that he's so free with the music.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you had to encapsulate your philosophy on music and its place in the world, what would that be?
I'd say that it has a very important place in the world. I think that, there's a lot of things that divide us and can be divisive, but what I love about music is like, you can close your eyes and enjoy it and it can move you emotionally. And you don't know who's playing it, what they look like, right? How they identify, where they're from, what their political philosophy is, right? It's one of those rare opportunities that we can have an experience that we can all kind of share with it. And that's why I think that like promoting music is really important, right? And teaching it is really important, and make sure that it kind of, stays like a primary part of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, I could certainly like talk about some of this stuff for like hours and hours. Yeah. So, but I know that, you're preparing for your move and, busy man. But so before we can wind things up for the day, we do have 2 segments that we need to get through.
Okay.
The first one is our Geared Up segment. This is for all of the gearhead trumpet players, which means every trumpet player. But I know that the last thing that someone of your experience wants to really answer is, what mouthpiece do you play? And what mouthpiece can you play a double high C on? But I think that gear is an important concept, but the way that we need to address it needs to change a little bit too. So, if you're going, I'm going to ask you what kind of gear you're playing on, but what I want to know is, kind of the thought process that goes on in your mind in terms of, what you're looking for with gear when you're making decisions on what to do, why you use what you use. And then also thinking about like, if you're able to give advice to someone, which obviously you do as an educator, of how to approach gear and the place of gear in the world of a musician, and so I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's talk gear.
Yeah, I think like for overall philosophy for me is like, I'm always trying to eliminate the instrument, if that makes any sense. And so, I want to be able to, whether like it's something I have to read off a page or something I have to hear, or it's something I'm improvising, like I don't want to think about the trumpet. Like I want to be connected to the music. And so for me, the gear is a way to get to that point so that it feels good. And maybe I'm getting the sound that I want to hear. Cause if it's a pleasant sound, it's a sound I like, I'm more apt to forget about the trumpet. It's like, okay, everything's dialed in the way that I want. So right now I'm playing, and I know you had him on the show recently. I'm playing a Venture mouthpiece.
Yes, sir.
That Doug made for me, which is like kind of like a hybrid of a bunch of things. It's like a 7 rim that I really love, but then like the drop is from a 3C and then the cup shape is different. And really for me, it was just getting something that was like slightly more efficient that let me kind of keep the horn on my face for long periods of time and still be to execute the things that I want to play. A lot of times I improvise, I like moving around a lot. I like playing really angular ideas. And so being super comfortable is part of that. I'm also like a big fan of Patrick mouthpieces. Steve is a great friend and somebody I worked with a lot when I lived in Nashville. So I still play his gear a little bit, but yeah, this Venture mouthpiece that Doug made for me is like amazing. And I would say for anybody that has like a piece of gear that you love, but you're always like, oh, I would just change this one thing about it. Like he's the person to talk to because he can change that one little thing about it. For B flat, I play 2 B flat trumpets. Both of them are New York box. They're super old box. I play one that's like a large bore with a 25 bell and a 6 lead pipe. That's primarily like this horn that I do like all my improvising on. And then I play another New York Bach that's a medium bore with a 38 bell and a Charlie Melk lead pipe. And that's like pretty much everything else. So like lead playing, any commercial stuff, even classical playing I do on that. Flugelhorn, I play an Adams F5, which is the copper one. And it's super pretty sounding, which is why I love it. And then piccolo trumpet, I play a Bach Artisan piccolo trumpet. And then I guess in terms of like what I tell my students, I think the first thing is like, does this feel okay? Right. So like if you're playing a mouthpiece that feels bad or hurts you, like let's switch it. Let's figure something out. I'm definitely not one of those people that comes in and is like, everybody must play in a 3C or everybody must play in a 1C with like a 25 throat. Like everybody's a little different. And so ultimately I want to make sure that they have something that feels really great, lets them get the sound they want, and then is also, not a drag to play. Cause I think for all of us, we're always kind of trying to balance that like playability and then the sound that we want. So just directing students, and because of that, I like never have mouthpieces because I'm always giving mouthpieces to students. So it's like the other day I was like, oh, I wonder what a 3C would feel like, cause I hadn't played one in a lot. And I realized like I'd given like 4 3Cs to all my students. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, my philosophy on gear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a point there I just wanted to ask you about, because, we all have our defaults. And I think that the two poles that we tend to go on with gear, like especially like mouthpieces, one is the comfort, how does it feel? And the other is the sound, and like you said, there's a kind of a balancing act that you have to work with. But like for yourself, are you more of a, I got to start with a feel and then start playing with the sound, or is it I got to go with the sound and then see if I can adjust it to make the feel work?
I think it's the sound part for me first, because I think that, going back to what we were saying earlier, I think that if it's the sound that I hear in my head and I feel like I'm getting to it, like that's the thing that keeps me like the most engaged. I will say, like, as I've gotten older, I feel like efficiencies become really important to me. And it's just because like I'm older, like I got 2 kids, I got stuff I got to do. So like when you're in school, when you're going to school and like you can practice 5 hours a day, big equipment feels amazing, right? Because you're getting all that time on your chops and you're like playing a lot. As you get older and you get like less practice time, I think like the efficiency thing got really important to me. And so I've found over the years, like my equipment's kind of gotten smaller, and I've learned to kind of let the resistance work for me a little more, as opposed to like feeling like I was like having to overpower the instrument. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of feels that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's, I think, one of those things that, as we were talking about earlier, that isn't really talked about a lot, in a formal kind of setting, that'd actually be an interesting class on, how to play test gear,
Yeah.
what things to look for, like mouthpiece design, horn design, things like that. I think that would be a really interesting, class to, maybe.
I've been an ITG member for like a long time, but I went to my first one in 2019, the one in Miami. And I was judging the jazz competition. And, but yeah, like, going in there, and I was so excited to try out all the horns, cause I was like, I've never been to one of these things. I get to try all these horns and mouthpieces. Like, wait a second, this is the worst possible environment for me to actually figure out if I need to change something.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, I think that, people don't know how to actually test.
Yeah.
Roger, you mentioned Roger Ingram earlier. Roger's done a couple of little posts or videos. I can't remember if he's done a video. I know he's done a couple posts about that, about the process that he recommends people to do for trying out a horn. It's like, this is what you should do. Don't go in there and just, try to play as loud as you can or as high as you can. These are the steps you should take. And, I think somebody to codify that to a degree, everybody's going to be different, obviously, but, maybe someone out there in Trumpet Gurus land will want to take up that project, and as long as I get my residual for that,
that's right.
Please do that.
That finder's fee.
Yeah, my little finder's. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that would be so useful. I mean, if I think back to my my earlier years, it would have saved me a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money to be able to know how to systematically go about picking the right gear.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like, also like going into it and going like, what is it that I need to change? Right. Cause if you go into the situation, just going like, I need to find something that makes me play better. Like that's pretty fraught with problems right there. So yeah, having an idea of like what it is that I'm actually looking for. What do I need to make better?
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. There's the key. It's having the right question.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked earlier about problem solving, and that's kind of a big thing for me is that as you get wiser, it's not that you know more, it's just that you know the right questions to ask. So
yeah.
and you start diving down, and when you ask enough questions and you ask enough of the right questions, you will find the answer. No one has to tell you, you'll find the answer. So being able to go through that process of, what is it that I'm unhappy about with my gear? What is it that I want my gear to do? Why do I need to change it? Why do I feel that I need? So, asking, maybe I'll just write the book, like the 101 questions you need to ask yourself for buying.
That sounds like where we're headed with this. We're having a session to convince you that this is the book that you need to write.
Okay. Well, and you can edit it for me.
So. Yeah, I'll edit it. Yeah, that's great.
and Augie will do the recipes to back it up. So, all right. Well, we're going to do our last segment, and this is brought to us by our good friends at Robinson's Remedies. This is the Robinson's Remedies rapid fire round. Series of questions that are going to bounce all over the place, much like your angular improvisation. You never know where this is going to go. Well, I know where it's going to go because I have the questions here in front of me. So just need your quickest answers to these following questions. Mr. Doctor, Doctor, I don't want to insult you.
That's fine.
Yeah. You didn't spend all those.
I'm not prescribing medicine or saving anybody's life, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, what was a line from Austin Powers? I didn't spend 4 years in evil school to be called.
That's right, Dr. Evil. That's right.
Yeah, Dr. Evil. All right, here you go. Matt White, first question for you. Who's the biggest influence on your life that is not a trumpet player?
My kids.
Okay. What is your favorite book?
I really like Zen and the Art of Archery. That's one I read a lot. And then also another book, I'm going to cheat. There's another book I really love. It's called Daily Rituals.
Okay, cool. What's the worst movie you've ever seen?
Well, so I like bad movies that are bad on purpose. So I can't like they're so bad. It's like, you're just enjoying how awful they are. But, I saw this Jupiter Ascending, which was like a sci-fi movie, and I love sci-fi movies. But the night before we went to the hospital to have my wife to have our first child, my daughter, we watched that, and it was such a bad movie that we had to create the experience to find another bad sci-fi movie to watch when she got ready to have my son. So I'm going to say Jupiter Ascending. Jupiter
Ascending. Okay. All right. If you were not a trumpet player, what would you want to be?
Probably still something with music. So maybe like music engineer or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. What is your favorite drink?
I only drink coffee, water, and scotch. So I'll say scotch.
At the same time?
No, I think that'd be pretty awful to mix them.
All right. Single malt or blends?
Single malt, Space.
Oh, okay. He's a Space. I'm a Highland kind of guy.
Oh, okay. All right.
You have a dinner party. You can invite any 3 living people. Any 3 people in the world can come to your dinner party. Who would you want to have there?
Herbie Hancock, Charles Barkley, and Bjork.
Awesome. Sir Charles would do the color commentary, obviously.
I just think he'd be kind of fun at a dinner party.
Yeah, just don't ask him to play golf.
That's pretty awful golf swing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Same dinner party. You've got 3 additional chairs. You could invite any 3 people from history.
Ooh. Dizzy Gillespie, Johann Sebastian Bach with a translator.
Okay.
And then probably maybe like Vincent van Gogh.
Okay. That would be really fun. Vincent will bring the absinthe. All right. Lacquer plated or raw?
Raw.
Okay. What's your favorite quote?
Work smarter, not harder.
That's a very good one. What is your greatest fear?
Ooh. I don't know, failure maybe? That's pretty deep, but yeah, failure.
Okay. You could be granted one superpower.
Ooh.
What would it be?
Maybe to like never not have to sleep so I could get more things done. Yeah, I'll go with that. That's good.
Okay, that's where the coffee comes in. All right. What aspect of trumpet playing do you feel is the most overrated?
Maybe like licks. I'm going to go with like maybe jazz improv part of it, but yeah, I'd say like licks, like knowing licks.
All right. What aspect do you feel is the most underrated?
Space, like we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. You can go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about music. What would it be?
Ask more questions. Yeah,
Okay.
to people that are really good at music. There's so many times like I should have asked a question and I didn't. I feel like I should, I regret that.
All right, cool. Same thing. You're back in time. You're going to be talking to your younger self. What advice would you give your younger self about life?
Listen more.
All right, good. Ask more questions and listen more. I think that about sums it up. And final question for you, Matt White. What do you want your legacy to be?
That I was somebody that like valued music and valued people.
Okay, very cool. Well, you are obviously well on your way towards accomplishing that. Your works, for people who aren't hip to the stuff that Matt's doing, certainly can follow him on social media. Check out his webpage, and there's all kinds of great stuff. This is a very talented. I'm going to call you a young man because you're younger than me. Very talented young man, bright future ahead of him. Lots to contribute, both as well. Actually, not both. This is going to be multiple as a player, phenomenal player, amazing composer, arranger, deranger, and educator. You're doing all you can do, man, and that is greatly appreciated. And you're inspiring to me, and hopefully people will start diving a little bit deeper into the things that you're doing and contributing. And I'm certainly looking forward to that big band hip hop thing. That's going to be banging.
Oh yeah, and also probably later this year I'm going to be recording the music for my Guggenheim Fellowship. I was a Guggenheim Fellow in 2019, so everybody check that out too. That'll be pretty interesting music as well.
Yeah. So, man, just keep on keeping on, my friend. And
thank you. Thanks for having me, man, and thanks for all you're doing with this podcast for the community. I think it's really great, so I appreciate it.
Well, it's the little bit that I can contribute. So, and maybe what I'll do is I'll see if I can get Mr. Hass, and we'll do a road trip from the East Coast, and we'll come down to South Carolina, and we'll hang out and drink some scotch and talk some stuff.
Yeah, it's always an epic hang with Augie for sure. I like that we bookended this by talking about Augie in the very back. That's great.
Yeah.
He'll be so happy.
Yeah, I know. We got to keep him happy because he owes me a dinner. So I'm trying to make him happy so that they make a really good dinner.
That's right.
So, Matt, thank you so much, my friend. And
thank you.
Looking forward to getting a chance to hear more of your work and having a real life hang one of these days real soon.
Absolutely.
All right. And thank you for spending time with us today on the Trumpet Gurus Hang. And make sure you check out all the links in the show notes. And, certainly follow Matt and keep abreast of what he's doing, because it's great stuff. So as always, folks, peace and slide grease. We out. Thanks for hanging with us today. This podcast is all about creating deeper connections through our mutual love of music and the trumpet life. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. And also like and share this episode with a friend. We want to see the hang grow for show. Please support our sponsors and consider becoming a personal supporter of this podcast as well. Remember, for less than the price of a bottle of valve oil a month, you can keep this podcast moving smoothly. The Trumpet Gurus Hang is recorded at the Candy Factory, a co-working space and social club located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Jose Johnson is the executive producer. Post-production editing is by Mitch Bowers. Our opening theme song was composed and performed by Lexi Signal. And our closing theme music comes courtesy of The Greatest Funeral Ever. Incidental music is by Ethan Swayze and Jose Johnson. Graphic design by Ann Kirby of The Sweet Corps. The Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast is produced in collaboration with the So Good Lancaster Media Group.